Hey guys, it's Dr. Havash. I want to give you a very quick introduction to ethical theories, kind of sketch out the landscape of the different thinkers that we'll be dealing with. I think this will help clarify as you move through the different readings what each thinker is trying to do and how we can sort of fit them together into an understanding of sort of ethics very broadly. Okay, so when we talk about ethical theories, the biggest category of ethical theories, the ones that we're really going to be concerned with in this class, are what are called normative ethical theories. And those are just theories that attempt to say, here's how we should behave. So they try to prescribe for us the norms, the rules, or the guides for how we should or ought to make choices. So often this is contrasted with theories that will just try to describe how humans actually behave. But what we're concerned about is what should be guiding our choices here. So these theories, the thinkers that we're going to talk about in this class, though they understand the basic ethical question very differently, and that colors how they approach developing their theory and the ways that they're going to try to lay it out and describe why this is the right way to go, why we should act in this particular way. So first we have to sort of distinguish between their understanding of the basic ethical question that they're trying to answer. So the oldest ethical theories, at least in Western philosophy, really understand the basic ethical question to be the one here on the screen, right? This question of how do I live the best life possible? What's it mean to be the most excellent human being that I can be? Their answer to this question is this idea of you have to cultivate the right kind of virtuous character. So these theories can kind of be lumped together, generally speaking, under this idea of virtue ethics. That ethics is about character development. It's about trying to live the best human life that we can possibly live. So there are a lot of questions that arise relative to this answer. It's a very general answer. And they have different ideas of what are the virtues we should be aiming for. How do we cultivate them? How do we become virtuous and or avoid the vices? So we've already seen De Young talk in this course a little bit about ethics from this sort of virtue and vice perspective, right? That it's about avoiding, right, those bad character traits and cultivating the good character traits. So we're going to talk a lot more about that when we talk about Plato and Aristotle, who are sort of the initial or the early virtue ethicists. So if the ancient philosophers understand ethics to be about cultivating the right kind of character, how do I live the best life? How do I develop the right sort of virtues in myself? The moderns, and modern in the philosophical sense, modern philosophy begins in the 1600s, so it's still several hundred years removed from where we are now, but their understanding of ethics is very different. It is really about this idea or this question of how do I know what the right thing to do is in any situation. So it's very specific and action oriented. Their answer to this question very generally is if you have the right sort of ethical principle as a kind of rule that you follow, it can answer this question in any situation you find yourself in. So it's not about developing a character that's kind of going to the kind of person that's going to do the right thing in this situation. It's how do I understand what the rule is and how do I apply it to this particular situation. The challenge is, right, which principle are we really talking about here? Why is that one the right one to follow, right, as opposed to something else? And then how do I actually apply it to these particular ethical dilemmas that I find myself in? Okay, so there are two broad categories for modern ethics. These aspiring philosophers trying to give principles that you should always follow in any situation that will tell you what the right thing to do is. So the first of those broad categories is called consequentialism. It's this idea that what makes a choice in any situation morally worthy is that it produces the best possible outcomes. So the most famous version of this is John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism. And I've given here the greatest happiness principle, which is his principle that you should follow in any situation. Act in such a way that you produce the greatest happiness for the greatest possible number. This is the sort of defining feature of utilitarianism. It's what should guide you in all of your choices. But as you see that, right, what should your questions be for Mill when he's telling you, here's how you should live? You should live so that you're always producing the greatest happiness for the greatest possible number. So it makes any choice worthwhile. You should have a lot of questions for him because he's telling you this is the right way to live. And if you're not doing this, you're making poor choices. You're acting immorally, in other words. So that's part of what the reading is about, is trying to sort of flesh out, why is this the right way to be? Do we really think this is? What does he really mean by the greatest happiness for the greatest possible number? Then we're going to see this contrasted by what are called deontological ethics. And the next thinker that we're going to read is Immanuel Kant, right? And this idea that, you know, what makes something worthwhile is not the outcome that it produces, right? It's actually what's behind the action, the motivation or the intent, right? That makes something, makes a choice worthwhile. For Kant, what we're really talking about there, right, is that the action has to be done from duty, from a sense of you have a moral obligation to do it, a sense of duty is requiring you to do it, not based on, right, what it actually produces. So we're going to talk a lot more about that, but it's a very different way of understanding what should be driving your ethical decisions. It's not what it produces. Can you be said to have a duty to make this choice? So the question that arises, right, or the conflict often is, how can we determine, right, if the act is done from duty or from desire, or because we want to do it on some level? Right? So Kant is really driving hard at things that have moral worth are done from duty. Things that are done from desire are problematic, right? And there's a lot to sort of get into and unpack there. But it's this question of how do we ensure that we are following our duties? That's what will sort of lead us to the right thing, making the right choice in any situation. So I want to distinguish very quickly Kant's answer to the basic ethical question from Mill's. So you can see Mill has his greatest happiness principle that attempts to be, it's the answer to that question, what should I do in any situation? Act in such a way that you produce the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Kant has a very different answer to that question and a different principle, and it's this one listed in bold here. In any situation, you should act in such a way that you can will that the maxim of your acts be turned into a universal law without contradiction. What does that mean? What it really means is that most of the time, when we propose to do something, we create these hypothetical imperatives for ourselves, these kind of if-then statements, right? If I want an A in this class, then I have to study really hard and do all the assignments, right? As the if part of that changes, it influences or changes the then part, right? So if I only want a C in this class, then I don't have to study very hard or as hard. I don't have to do all the assignments, right? So there's that connection between the if-then part. The conditions influence what you should do. But part of what Kant is suggesting is that's not true for really demanding situations when it comes to morality. And what we should be doing instead is acting in such a way that we can create the maximum of our action, turn it into a universal law. What does that mean? It really means, my little strike through on the if part didn't come through under categorical imperative, so you should draw a line through the if. The if part doesn't matter. Right? For a categorical imperative, to make it categorical, that means across all categories. That means it is universally applicable. And the imperative part means it's a command. It's not a suggestion or a recommendation. So one of the examples that's frequently used for this is, if my children are starving and the only way to feed them is to steal food, then I should steal food. That's our hypothetical imperative given the situation we find ourselves in. If I run that through the categorical imperative, if I apply this principle here, right, to that, I have to cross out, right, all of the if and just what is the maxim of my action? What is it I'm proposing to do? What I'm proposing to do is steal food. Can I will that that becomes a universal law such that everyone is morally required to do it? What would that mean? What kind of system of human interaction relative to property would we have if you were morally required to steal? The video's not broken. I'm pausing so you can think about that. Take another very frequent example, right? Lying. If the only way to get what I want, whatever that is to lie, then I need to lie. If we run that through the categorical imperative, where we take out the if part and just have what's the maximum I'm proposing to lie, right? Can I turn that into a universal law where there is no contradiction? Kant thinks absolutely no, you cannot, right? What happens to the system of human communication, right, if, right, everybody has a moral obligation to lie? If there is, it's not just lie when you want, when it suits you, you have a moral obligation to lie. The law of the system, in other words, is to lie. Right? Kant thinks this shows you can never have a duty to lie. You can never have a duty to steal. And so it doesn't matter the situation. It doesn't matter if your children are going to die, right? Or if you think they're going to die. It doesn't matter if you're going to fail this class, right? And the only way to get out of that is to lie to your professor, right? Those conditions don't matter. What matters is the moral law. Can you be said to have a duty to do those things? And he thinks you can never have a duty to lie or steal. There's a lot more to unpack here, but that's the basic understanding of that, is only if you can have a duty to do it does it have moral worth. Okay, so I've laid out very generally the landscape of these normative ethical theories so you can understand the very rudimentary features of the theories. What we're going to do in the course is just dive deeply into why the individual philosopher thinks these are right. That's what they're supporting their version of ethics with the best arguments they can muster. So the task for you is to read critically and think about, right, what do they have right and what do they have wrong? Okay? It's tough. This is tough reading. If you can go toe-to-toe with any of these guys, then you will be much better and sharper for it. That's part of the value of reading philosophy and engaging with some of the most brilliant people ever to walk the face of on the face of the earth. So as you move through the reading, right, I want you to be honest about your questions. There's things in here that will stump any philosopher who's been reading these things for a long time, myself included. So you shouldn't feel any shame about that. You shouldn't feel like I have to understand everything perfectly. I'll create a discussion board where hopefully you can post questions if you have them, and I can respond. That will help as you move through the reading. But just understand I'm here to help you. So even though we won't be meeting face to face, let me know how I can help, how I can clarify things, and I'll be glad to do so. Thanks, everyone.